We're live.
All right. So welcome back to Faith Family United Church of Christ Bible study. We are studies in Acts. We are currently on chapter 17. So if you want to look there.
You said chapter 17.
17. Yeah. Those are...
Thessalonica.
Those here, I've got some handouts. That's for next week.
All of them?
There's two for each. One is 18 and one is I don't know
This
what
one
I
says
got.
20 on it?
Yeah. And that should say 19.
Okay.
So 19 and 20, there's 2 pages each for that. So for those of you at home, what I've done is I've made a little note card, if you will. So we read the story, and then underneath the story, there's a place to take notes for. So when you come to the Bible study, you have some notes or some questions that you might have about this, about the what's going on in our text. So, but let's go ahead and get started in chapter 17. And there is an uproar in Thessalonica. So, so what's interesting is it, some people pronounce it Thessalonica, and some people pronounce it.
I never heard it pronounced any other way. So I don't know.
Thessalonica.
That's an area?
Huh?
Yes.
Yes.
It's like a region.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we have here is the uproar. Some of the Greeks decided that they didn't like the fact that Paul was also preaching. Hey, Val, and hey,
Gentlemen.
Where?
they didn't like the fact that they were preaching to non-Jews, and so they said that they were teaching things that weren't in accordance with Jewish laws, and so they
That's next week's.
they tried to basically get them run out of town, and if you run them out of town, they usually took them out of town and stoned them. So so that's what we have here, and they were shouting, "These people who have been turning the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has entertained them as a guest." So what has happened is this person who lived right next to the temple, or their Jewish synagogue, invited them in to stay with him. And so they're saying, look at these people are... And so they were trying to kill them. And it says, of course, their idea to try to get him in trouble with the Roman authorities is saying that their teaching is contrary to the emperor's decree, and they're calling this Jesus the real king, not the king emperor, the Caesar. So verse 7, when they couldn't win the debate, because remember, Paul's the one preaching, and Paul was a student of Gamaliel, which is he's like the top of the top educator for the Jewish studies and everything. And when they couldn't reason against Paul, because Paul just shot him down, and he's proving that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the one that they've been waiting on. And so they couldn't do that. They turned to, let's get him a different way. Let's just get the Romans after him. Does that sound familiar? What did they do with Jesus?
Yeah.
When they couldn't find anything really wrong with him on their own, they took him to Pilate and said, he's saying all this stuff about the emperor, the Caesar, and they tried to get him. Of course, they got him crucified, but here it didn't work as well. So So Paul and Silas, they leave. They go to Berea. Okay. You ever heard of Berea?
Berea Baptist.
a lot of there's a Berea, Kentucky. There's a lot of Baptist churches that are called Berea.
It's kind of a denomination or something.
Yeah. So they go to Berea, and this is my favorite, one of my favorite verses. Starting in, we'll read the first part of it here. That very night, the believers sent Paul and Silas off to Berea. And when they arrived there, they went into the Jewish synagogue. These Jews were more receptive than those of Thessalonica, for they welcomed the message very eagerly and examined the scriptures every day to see whether these things were so. Wow. That's something. And yet people want to just, you've got a new teaching, get out of here. We're conservative here. We don't believe in that stuff. But yet, here in the Bible, here in the New Testament, people are commended, saying that they're of more noble character. So what does it say that? They were more receptive. Another translation says they were of more noble character because they did this. They listened to what they had to say, first of all, and then they said, okay, well, let's go back and examine it ourselves and see if, that's what it's actually saying. And so here we have this, and I think of all the times that, and we were talking about this a little earlier, all the times that people say, you're just trying to change us, and you're not a true Christian because you believe that, and we've never believed that. And yet, here we have this idea that, some people just want to be told what to do, and if you're going to tell us something different, we don't want to hear it. And here's a good example. Okay, this is a book. I had to read this book in the last year of my undergraduate study. I went to my last couple of years. I went to Liberty College, and this book is called Fool's Gold. Okay, and the whole premise of this book is only reading the Bible and getting all your answers from the Bible. But they didn't, But you can't do that because you're not going to understand culture 2,000 years ago and why they did that. So you have to understand the culture. You have to understand the Jewish mindset. Now, another book that I'm reading right now, he's pointing out that the Gentiles, once we get out of the Acts where no longer the Jews aren't the main movers and shakers of the Christian movement, it's the Gentiles, and they forgot about the Jewish roots. The whole reason that they're there was this movement through Judaism expecting the Christ. And so they forgot, and they don't understand. And so they took everything literally. And you can't take everything literally because there's a lot of, what's it called? I always forget this word. When you're talking about something but you're not saying it. What's that called?
Allegory.
Yeah, but there's one word.
Foreshadowing. I don't know.
I
Can't help you.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, it doesn't. It's a play on words. If you know what that means, and it's not necessarily actual. For instance, when we're talking about Gehenna, we don't even use the word Gehenna. Most of our translations don't say Gehenna. What does it say? Hell. And this concept of hell isn't from the Jewish background, the Jewish understanding. this was a, I don't want to say euphemism, but it was something to depict it in a way that you could understand it in the physical term. In other words, Jesus is saying it's going to be really bad. Okay? So we've taken this idea of, okay, well, how bad is it going to be? Well, Gehenna is a valley right outside of Jerusalem. Now, first of all, the valley of Gehenna used to be to another god where they would sacrifice. And they sacrificed women, children, innocent people. Huh?
Are you saying they killed them? Is that what you're saying?
Sacrificed. and so this was a despicable place for the Jewish people. So what do you do with the despicable place? Well, you just turn it into a trash heap. Okay, so they turned it into a trash heap. Well, what happens at trash heaps? And I saw this when I was in Iraq, flying over some of their trash dump sites. People are actually living in there, and they're rummaging through things to
They're that hungry.
Yeah, hungry materials that, oh, I can fix this or stuff like that. But still, and there was constant like burning of this trash, and so the concept. See the concept there.
Yeah, Gehenna is the lake of fire.
Terrible place, you know. And so we take, oh well, that sounds like the Jewish thing, what we call hell, place of torment, and we kind of brought that together. But it doesn't say hell, and it doesn't say that you're going to. It's just using that as a visual, to put in your mind how, you know, how disgusting and terrible this is going to be. Anyway, but we forgot about that because we didn't hold on to our Jewish roots, and everything for the Gentiles, the Gentile Christians, was literal. Does that make sense? Okay. So, but here we have these people that Paul is talking about Jesus. He's talking about the Christ, and he's showing people how in the Old Testament scriptures, because he didn't have the New Testament scriptures yet. So everything that we have in the New Testament scriptures probably stems from what he taught. And so he's teaching those people, and the Jews, they know, hey, let's go look at our scrolls. Let's look at see if he's saying is true or not. And yeah, it's adding up. But we've forgotten that, and we just kind of go with whatever is in the New Testament. It's kind of almost one of those things where the New Testament actually hurts Christianity because we don't understand what the Christ is about. And neither did the Jews, because they were expecting him to be one way, and the Christ was a completely different way. So, okay, so the Bereans were more noble. There was one other thing here in verse 14. Verse 14, right there, starts right there. Notice that they remained behind in Thessalonica. Silas and Timothy were left behind. Okay. And that's important because a lot of times we have to remember that the book of Acts is almost putting everything together. You know, there's the letters to the Thessalonians. There's letters to the Colossians. There's letters to the Romans. There's all these letters, and all of these were written before we're getting the book of Acts. So it's almost like, you know, all these letters, and when you read in the book of Acts, if you have just been hearing about the letters that Paul sent to these other, you're immediately going to, oh, I know what he's talking about there. Oh, and this is one of them. Those things where Silas and Timothy is left behind to do work on the problems that they have there and show them how to be living like Christ wants us to live. And he's moved on. And now he's got to write letters back to them. And this kind of brings that all together in the story form. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah, Timothy. Another thing is, a lot of scholars don't believe that Paul wrote Timothy, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus. It was written probably after the book of Luke was written, or right about the same time. And that could have been just the opposite way, if you can imagine that. They got the book of Acts and they see, oh, Timothy's an interesting name, and Titus is there as well in the book of Acts. So let's tell the people how to conduct themselves as Christians, but we'll say that Paul wrote it to them. And it's kind of like a pseudo Paul. And we have a lot of books like that. They call them the pseudepigrapher or the apocrypha, books that aren't really written by who they are, and we don't consider them full scripture. But for some reason, Timothy and Titus had been incorporated into these by the early church, probably as early as 150-ish. Most of the churches had a copy of it. So, what do you think about that?
You think about what? You said a lot of things.
The idea of Acts being to one of the things Acts was to pull all the letters together and give a story, the backstory to the letters.
It's true. Luke was a storyteller. He wrote it as a novel, and not scripture like the Gospels were. It was just an accounting where he gathered witnesses.
But he also wrote the Gospel of Luke.
Yeah, but Acts wasn't intended for that same purpose. It was more of a anthology of what had happened during that time.
Okay, I can see that. I agree.
And
with
I think
that.
it's aptly named too.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you watch the play, there are acts.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good. I never thought of that. I like that. I like that. But also, I said this before. I don't know if you remember. I think one of the main purposes that Acts was written by Luke was when he wrote the Gospel of Luke. Do you see Paul? Paul's not in the Gospels, and so how we got all these letters from this guy Paul?
Without that character.
Yeah, so he has to write Acts to give the backstory of who Paul is and why he's so prevalent as writing and instructing these churches. So, what do you think about the idea that most non-conservative scholars, I'll say it that way, don't accept Paul writing 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus?
I think it doesn't matter in academia. Once an academic is established, he doesn't work anymore on his own manuscripts. He has people that he's trained. I think that's a common thing in writing in academia. Whereas a lot of things are contributed to people who had the novel idea, the actual writing and the research that went into it is not by the person who's named. I think that's pretty common practice. Because I don't think it matters. I think it's probably disciples of Paul who he taught, and they knew him intimately and were aware of his ideals and his teachings. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm not hung up on that because I don't believe the Bible is breathed by God. Like somebody went into a trance and wrote it. That's not what I believe.
No. Okay.
Well, Paul was like the most educated of all of the
Oh yeah.
of the apostles,
Yes.
disciples.
Yeah, he was a Pharisee where he'd had spent his whole life studying, The others were fishermen and tax collectors and tent make. Well, he was a tent maker too, but just they had a lot of other. But true, what we would now call Hasidic Jews, that they just their life of learning is the most important thing, and their jobs are just to support their learning. So I think that's kind of what Paul was. So yeah, I agree with you. He was the most educated.
Does it matter if it was him that wrote it or somebody else? I don't think so. What makes what makes certain scholars feel that way? What is the thing that makes them think that?
Well, the way that just like today, we can go back, and I'll do this. I'll talk about the 1950s, which was, holy cow, that was 75 years ago. You know, but you don't even have to go back that far. You can go back within 10 or 20 years and look at the language that is being used. You know, even in scholarly things, that you know, the use of what they call the Harvard comma, where you almost put a comma after Oxford comma. You put a comma after everything, you know, and just little things like that you can pick up on if you're really immersed into that language or into that kind of writing. And so they can pick up on that. And so they can say, this was written earlier or later. And so they see things like that. And then they also weigh it against, why is this person writing this? He's never used these terms before. And now they're writing and saying, what?
I was going to say that the real reason why people want to take the Bible literally is control. The Bible says women shouldn't teach. There's no question about it. You can't question it. The Bible says that is a sin. That's what you don't get to question it. So it was a way to control people, because they set the Bible up as a fourth deity, and they said it's like we should worship the Bible, and it's infallible, when that's never what it was intended to be. But for conservative sects and it's not just Christianity, Muslim conservatives, Jewish conservatives, they all use the text to control people, so that then there's no question about the decisions they make and the positions that they present to the world. It's simply what it is.
Yeah.
So.
We'll stop there on that. Let's go on to chapter 18. And this is... What happened there? I'm sorry. Hold on. I missed the second part of that. Did I? Yeah, Paul. I turned 2 pages instead of 1. Paul in Athens, okay? And Cindy has something to tell us about this.
What?
Paul in Athens.
You didn't prep me for that.
I know. Tell us about your experience in Athens. Okay, so a lot of times this is sometimes called Paul on Mars Hill, and Mars, not the planet, but the god Mars.
God of war.
God of war, exactly. And it's called the Areopagus, where a lot of philosophers would come, and it's on top of the hill, isn't it, Cindy?
Yeah.
Way on top of the hill in Athens, and we actually went there. We went to Athens one time, and that's why I was kind of seeing what she would tell us. But there's 2 things there: Mars Hill and Areopagus. Guess what? That's the Greek god of war and the Roman god of war. And I baffled my New Testament teacher, and this goes back to this kind of thing. Now, did I finish telling you that this book is all about just studying the Bible, right? And don't worry about anything else, and just the Bible. And their premise to that is the Secret Service, the people that guard the currency. They look for counterfeiters. They don't learn all the different techniques about counterfeiters. They just study how original is made. And by just studying the original, you'll know what is fake. I've seen a movie that kind of contradicts that. You see the movie, what was the one with DiCaprio? Catch Me If You Can, where he was this great counterfeiter, and he'd come up with all these different techniques, and he was getting away with it. And they ended up hiring him because he knew all these different techniques. So I don't believe that. So where was I going with that? Oh, so my professor, all he did was study the New Testament. He didn't know Greek mythology. And so I asked him, I say, why does it do that? Why does it say Mars Hill and then says the Areopagus? And he goes, I don't know. But you picked up on that right away. And the idea is they're basically saying the same thing. You have the Greek god of war, which is Mars, and then Ares is the Roman god of war. Basically the same thing, but just Roman and so we get both of those put together here in the New Testament. But they didn't put those two together, or this guy that only studied the New Testament put this together. So, okay, so the first thing that he does is he's deeply distressed by all the idols. So he gets up there and he sees, Mars and Ares and Athena and all these different worship sites to these different gods, and he's very distressed by it. And then he's going to teach them. But how do you teach them? And you don't come in there and you don't say, let me tell you, you guys are wrong, and I'm going to show you you're wrong. He doesn't do that. He goes and he finds an idol that says, to the unknown God. And he starts there. He goes, let me tell you about the unknown God. And he starts where they are. And he explains Jesus to them, how Jesus is the Christ from that point. Because think about that. If I come in here and I tell you, you guys have been doing it wrong all along, and I'm going to tell you how to properly, how long do you think you would keep me around? You're not even going to listen to what I have to say. And I think that's a very important lesson to learn here in this, because he starts where they are, and he doesn't insult them. He doesn't attack them. And it says he's very disturbed by all these idols, but yet he doesn't attack that. Instead, he says, well, let's talk about this. You have an idol here to the unknown God. Well, let me tell you about the unknown God. And I love that. That's another part of Acts that I really love, and I think that's very important for us to know, because I think that's a way that we can get. I think it might be in my sermon today. I'm not sure. I have to look at my notes. But one of the things that is true is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And in other words, if you don't care about me, I'm not going to listen to you. But if you show me that you care first, then I'll listen to you. So, and that goes back to my philosophy, is you have to love first, always. You have to love first. Because if you don't show people that you love them, they're not going to listen to you. So, okay. So, a little bit of preaching there. I said, what else can we learn from this story? One of the things is that I noticed that at the end there, it says some of them, not all of them. This, they're like, that's pretty interesting. He didn't insult us. They invited him back to come back and talk to him some more. And some of them, hey, this guy knows his stuff, and they became believers. So by not insulting, how many people would have, if they would have insulted people, how many people would have said, hey,
Come back. Right?
yeah, don't even come back. And then the people that were there, of course, they're with them, and they're going to side with the people they know because they don't know this guy. He just showed up here today, and now he's trying to change our way of thinking and telling us we're wrong. But he didn't. He was very, I don't know the word, very accommodating to them. In other words, he wasn't offensive and
Respectful.
yeah, respectful, exactly. I mean, he was in somebody else's house too, right? Okay. So that's Paul in Athens. We have time to go into Corinth, or are we going to... Let's go ahead and stop there. We'll get into chapter 18 next week, okay? So, chapter 18, Paul goes to Corinth. Once again, Cindy, what do you know about Corinth?
It has a big fish market.
Don't get on the wrong bus. We went to Corinth and we got on the wrong bus, and we were going the opposite way. And by the time we figured it out, we got to Corinth about 15 minutes before 3, and it was Saturday. They were closing everything down at 3. So we had to run through the ancient ruins anyway. Okay, so we'll start there with Corinth next week, chapter 18. So please read ahead, and just if you have any questions or any things that you notice, put them down so we can have a discussion. And I'm not preaching. I don't like to preach in Sunday school. I want to hear what you guys have to say.
Pastor Ed, do you watch these old westerns at all on TV?